Hello, friends. Myself, Dr. Pradeep Tiwari. A lot of people recently have been asking me about a very important issue that is being highlighted these days, and it is the mental health disorder. And we know a lot of news has been coming about suicides, about celebrities committing suicides, and uh, professionals committing suicides in this lockdown. And suddenly there has been a lot of talk about mental health issues and how to deal with mental health by a lot of people. So here I have come up with this video, and there's a very important thing that I want you all to know, and that is the ego defense mechanisms. Now, the main idea of me making this video is trying to make you understand about how the human psychology works, because I think if we all know to some extent about how we think or how our ideology works, then it becomes a lot easier for us to know why we react in a particular way, and how should we react, and what are the things that we can do to modify our reaction to a particular stressful situation. And let me tell you, the main difference between a successful person and a very mediocre person is the difference in the ego defense mechanism of the two individuals. Also, a difference between a person who is mentally ill and personally person who is mentally very sound is basically the ego defense mechanism. So you need to know about this. I know the whole concept of this ego and ego defense mechanism is a bit complicated, and it's a detailed study, but in this video I have tried to make things a lot simpler for you, and I hope you like it. So basically, the human ideology or the human psychology works on three basic principles, which is known as the id, the ego, and the superego. Now, a lot of things give us pleasure. So we, as animals, have certain pleasure principles or things that out of which we derive pleasure. So all these things basically constitute the id or the pleasure principle. Now, by virtue of our social development and socioeconomic and cultural development, we all have a set of moral values or ethics which constitute the superego. Now, ego is the one in between, which is trying constantly to create a balance between the id, which is the pleasure principle, and the superego, which is our moral or ethical principles. And this is where ego is always in conflict, because at times we may have events or situations wherein we did do something which was very pleasurable to us, but then we think that morally this was not satisfying, and again the ego is not able to create a balance between the two, and ego has gone into a conflict. Similarly, at times there are situations when we are morally very sound and ethically we are correct, but then we think that maybe we missed out on our pleasures, maybe we did not derive a lot of happiness in doing this. So again, the ego is in conflict, because the superego was satisfied but the id remained unsatisfied. And this ego, which is trying to create a balance between the pleasure and the morals, when it goes into a conflict, it tries to react in a particular manner by a particular mechanism, which is known as the ego defense mechanism. As I previously mentioned, the main difference between a person who is very successful, believe me, and a person who is very mediocre, at the same time, the difference between a person who is mentally very sound and person who is mentally challenged or mentally weak is basically the ego defense mechanisms. So we need to know what are these ego defense mechanisms. So the reaction of the ego, the mechanism by which ego reacts, is known as the ego defense mechanism. So ego defense mechanisms in psychology have been classified as mature ego defense mechanisms, which are very few to number, and the immature defense mechanisms, which are very large in number. So we all have this habit of having an immature ego defense mechanisms that we need to shift, and we need to change them immediately, and we need to inculcate habits so that our ego defense mechanism becomes more mature, and we basically try to react to situations or events with a more and more mature kind of ego defense mechanism. Without wasting more time, let me tell you by example what are these immature kind of ego defense mechanism and what are the very important mature kind of ego defense mechanism that we need to have. So, for example, the first one is known as rationalization. Now, it is a very immature kind of an ego defense mechanism, wherein whatever we do, we try to rationalize them, uh, despite knowing that somewhere that this is wrong, but we tend to keep rationalizing it, keep justifying it. So this kind of a defense mechanism is known as rationalization. Similarly, we have regression, we have repression. In regression, the person actually behaves childlike, or he actually starts behaving in an age which is in a manner which is age inappropriate for him, or maybe in a simple manner trying to explain you that the person starts behaving childish in response to a very stressful or a noxious idea that is roaming around in his mind. Similarly, we have projection, in which a person having ideas of hate to certain person actually says that he is the person who hates me. So he is basically projecting his ideas as someone else's idea. This kind of ego defense mechanism, again, very immature. This is known as projection. And there's a big list of very immature kind of ego defense mechanisms that people have. Like I mentioned, rationalization, projection, repression, regression, undoing. There's one thing known as somatization, wherein the person having a bad idea or a bad event or a bad situation, basically that gets that comes out in form of some pain or some illness in the person. This is known as somatization. This is basic the mechanism by which people have disorders like hysteria or conversion. Basically, there's a big list of immature defense mechanism. Denial is yet another ego defense mechanism where the person simply denies that this actually happened. Not concentrating more on the immature kind of ego defense mechanism, let me talk about something that you need to know, which is known as the mature ego defense mechanism or the good ego defense mechanisms. Now, as I mentioned, there's a big list of immature ego defense mechanisms. So, if we have those kind of immature ego defense mechanisms, it plays a big hindrance in our success, and mentally we are not very sound. On the other hand, if we have these few mature ego defense mechanisms, we are mentally a lot sound and we end up being a very successful person. So, as I told, immature ego defense mechanisms are very large in number. There are a lot of immature ego defense mechanisms, but there are very few mature ego defense mechanisms. So, if we start talking in detail about immature ego defense mechanisms, the whole idea of this video will be undone. So, let me concentrate more on this mature kind of defense mechanisms that you should adopt and you should inculcate in your behavior, and this will help you to have a better mental health and a very successful life. So, what are these mature or good ego defense mechanisms? First one that I want to talk about is suppression. Now, what is suppression? In suppression, you actually consciously suppress bad ideas or bad thoughts that have been irritating you or noxious kind of feelings, and you deal with them separately. Now, what do I mean? For example, there is a family function and your mom said something to you which you felt really bad about. But instead of disrupting the family function, instead of breaking the family function into some kind of a quarrel, instead of disrupting the whole situation or the function, you continue to maintain the decorum of the place, continue to maintain the decorum of the situation, and sometime later you walk up to your mom and talk to her about this. So basically, you have suppressed consciously bad feeling that had been in you, and you are dealing with it separately. This form of ego defense mechanism is known as suppression, which is very very good. And if you inculcate this kind of a habit, it will be good for you. The second one is a very important ego defense mechanism, which we all do, is known as distraction. So basically, if we have a bad idea or a bad thought, we actually try to distract our conscious mind from it by doing something which was very pleasurable to us. For example, we all do this. For example, if we had a bad day in office, we invite our friends, we catch up with our friends, we go for a movie, or we go to a restaurant with the family to have a dinner. So basically, we are trying to distract our conscious mind from the bad feeling or the bad ideas that we had. This ego defense mechanism is again mature and good one, a validated one, which is, as I mentioned, distraction. The next one is anticipation. Anticipation is nothing but having hope. You are currently in a bad situation, but you anticipate or you hope that with some help you can come out of it. For example, you are short of money and you are facing economic crisis, but you hope that maybe you will find a good job, or maybe your parents will help you through and you may be able to come out of this economic crisis. This kind of a defense mechanism is again good. Basically it involves hope, and whenever a person has hope, there's very less chance that he will get shattered or he will fall to a mental illness. Again good, as I mentioned. The next one is humor. Humor again is a very important and a very mature kind of an ego defense mechanism. We all know that in all group we have this one or the other person who tries to find funny side to everything that is being said to him, the good and even for the bad. He always will find something funny about it and he will keep a laugh on his face. Now we know that such kind of people have very less chance of developing depression because they always find funny side to anything that is being presented to them. This is again a very good kind of ego defense mechanism. So if we all have a good sense of humor, we basically have this kind of ego defense mechanism. We will actually end up becoming less distressed with all bad ideas that we have, and we'll try to find some funny side to whatever situation we are in. The next ego defense mechanism, which is mature and which is very good, is known as sublimation. Now, I want you to know about sublimation. Sublimation is an ego defense mechanism in which a bad idea or a bad noxious stimulus or a bad thought is positively used by the person to construct something which is very good for him. For example, let me tell you that there's a fat guy who is being criticized by all his friends. There's a lot of jokes that are being cracked on him because of his weight, and he actually doesn't get distressed by it. He doesn't go into a depression. He doesn't feel bad about it. He rather uses this as a motivation. He joins gym. He exercises regularly, and he actually ends up losing a lot of weight and becoming a lot fit. Now, there's this bad idea or this bad insult or a noxious kind of thought that is present in him, but he has positively used it. He has positively used it to construct something good in his life, and this is known as sublimation. Again, a very important ego defense mechanism and a very successful kind of an ego defense mechanism. If you inculcate this, there's very high chance that you will be very successful, because for every odds that is being presented to you or every bad feeling that you have, you will come up with something which is very constructive. Next one that we have is the altruism, which is again a very, very important and very mature kind of ego defense mechanism. In altruism, basically a person who had suffered something wrong, he does something so that others don't suffer from it. A good example of this is, we all know about this story that we had a movie made on this story and it received national award. There's this person who could not take his ill wife to a hospital because it was around 200 kilometers away and there were a lot of mountains in the way. So his wife actually died, and after death of his wife, he single-handedly constructed a road from within the mountains so that people from his village could have access to this primary health care center. And because of this road, this whole journey of 200 kilometers was reduced to few minutes. So basically, because of his suffering, he did something towards a society that others did not suffer from it. So this kind of a ego defense mechanism is again very mature, and most of the social reform movement leaders basically have this kind of a ego defense mechanism, that what makes them separate from the whole population, and that's what makes them lead the reform movement, because they have suffered something and they don't want others to suffer from it. So they satisfy their ego by doing something so that others don't suffer from it. So this kind of a ego defense mechanism is again very mature, and it yields a lot, not only to the person but also to the whole society. So I want you to know all this 6 kind of mature ego defense mechanism. Also, I want you to switch over from a very immature kind of a ego defense mechanism to these mature ego defense mechanism. So if you are inculcating them in your daily life, there's a very high chance that you will be successful. Also, very less chance that you will suffer from mental health disorders, because most of the mental health disorders that arise in human beings are from immature kind of ego defense mechanisms. So knowing this basic kind of a human psychology may be helpful to us, and we can basically try to modify our reaction to situations, and this modification will actually help in the long run, help us to have a serene nature and maintain our mental health. At the same time, we may be actually more efficient than others in dealing with situation. And there's a very important thing that I want you to know is I want you to propagate this video to as many people as you can, because you may be sounding quite familiar with these ideologies, and maybe you have good ego defense mechanisms, but then there are people who actually need to know about this, and there are a lot of people who actually need to switch over from a very immature defense mechanisms to these mature defense mechanisms. And if we all try to inculcate these in our daily lives, then definitely we'll see the change in ourselves, we'll see the change in people around us, and we'll see the change in the way we look at stressful situations. So with this message, I will sign out, and I hope you all find it very interesting as well as very helpful, and you will try to inculcate this in your daily life. I know this whole idea is a bit complicated, and these nomenclatures are a bit difficult to know, but having known them, having put them in your life, having inculcated them in your reactions, you will definitely find the change. Thank you.